Words of Justice podcast, starting on the first episode. Right now we're going to do a little audio check. We're getting ready to gear up for February to start producing some serious content. So I'm sitting down with Paul Synnott and Chris Coulter, two friends of mine, to kind of go over what the show is going to be about, what I'm going to talking about. So let me introduce Paul. Paul, my political advocate friend, he would be a good example of one kind of conversation that we're going to have on Words of Justice. The goal is to bring people like Paul on, who's, Paul's a political expert. I can then use my personality to bring out what he knows. So when we talk about Paul, minimum wage is a big argument right now, right? So I'm going to use a lot of current events in this
Sure.
podcast and hopefully kind of elaborate on it. So what's your opinion on what is minimum wage doing to our community in, like, let's say Windsor, and then what does that do nationally or internationally?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the biggest thing is Ontario. I mean, as somebody who's opening a business, we speak, even though I'm not employing people right now, looking to employ people in the future, I have no problem with minimum wage increases. I think what most business owners are struggling with now is how fast this has happened. There's no doubt that there needed to be an increase, but when you compare it with Alberta is raising theirs to $15 as well. But they've essentially been doing it over a 4-year period. Ontario's doing it over an 18-month period. So you're looking at, this year alone, a 22% increase for business owners, plus the additional paid sick days, plus the additional vacation week, and then another $1 increase next year. So over 18 months, businesses are taking almost a 35% hit, which is tough. And unfortunately, there's going to be consequences. And for some business owners, that's actually reducing hours or laying off people or cutting benefits. So we're a market economy. Things go up, you have to compensate for it.
Well, so Chris Coulter, now you're a CEO of a new company that you and I are creating, and we're kind of going to leave that in the shadows for a moment. But in this new company, how do you think that this is going to affect what we're doing in our business?
I don't think it's going to really affect anything at all. To be honest, I think it's a really good thing that minimum wage is going up. Paul, to your point, I do think it was happening very quickly, but unfortunately, this is how it is now. And I think the problem with it is all the big corporations are only the ones that are complaining, and it's not really the small businesses that are complaining. All I'm hearing is big corporations complaining. Those are the exact ones that can afford it and should be paying their employees more.
The problem is that they're not actually eating it. So places like, they're already finding loopholes and ways to cut breaks and ways to cut this. So it's you're looking at a human rights argument as there's a wage increase, as we're going to increase the quality of living for these people who have an increased wage. But, their quality of work life is going to decrease because the morale is going to drastically disprove kind of disintegrate. The morale is going down. All of a sudden, Tim Hortons is at war with its workers. All of a sudden, the customers are trying to boycott coffee as if they could, as if it's not the biggest drug of choice that they have, and they get completely addicted to Tim Hortons. But they have this fantasy that they're going to boycott it, and that the backlash is crazy. I think the bigger problem that I see personally is not even the actual numbers, because to be honest with you, not too many people are economists or even financially savvy enough to realize what $2 or $20 or $2,000 does. It doesn't really matter what the number is. It just matters the emotionality of the decision. So the change, like your transition point or lack thereof, right, Paul, is you're looking at the lack of transition is bigger than the thing itself. You need to allow people to adjust and to have their opinions heard and to maybe have a little bit of pushback. Like those corporations were going to have pushback, so they were forcing it down the corporation's throat. But when you force something down anybody's throat, you have something called blowback, not pushback. That's the unintended consequences of your actions. So from a leadership perspective, it was completely backwards.
But don't forget, I mean, we get lost. I mean, the Tim Hortons is kind of a bad example. Don't forget, more than 70-80% of businesses that are employing minimum wage workers or just above minimum wage are small businesses. So when I'm talking, not everybody has the luxury of being able to increase their prices 30% to cover the cost. I mean, if you walked in and your burger cost, $2.50 today, and it's $5.50 tomorrow.
Yeah, we don't do that.
That can hurt. It can really hurt your bottom line.
Well,
so then you have to look for other ways to compensate for that massive adjustment. If it's a 5, 8, 10% increase year over year, that's a lot different to deal with than a massive, like I said, 22% and then another 10%.
But that is a problem, part of it, because of the infinite growth corporation model. So that corporations, especially, the reason that corporations are crying for it, because they operate differently than the small business model. The small business needs to create profits, yes, but not quarterly dividends for its shareholders.
Right.
So when you have to create an infinite growth model, you obviously have to take that money from somewhere. So here's the biggest problem. Now they're they're like taking tips away from their customers, or trying to,
which is
or
illegal,
from
by
their
the way.
employee. They're either putting the price up on the customer and or taking tips away from employees, as if that's okay. So to me, it's like the corporations are showing us again how it's a corporatocracy, saying that, even if our government changes the stipulations, just don't worry, we'll change the rules again, because now we're gonna have a different human rights fight again. We have to, like, almost if we would have did it right and outlaid the plan correctly, they would have already very James Cameron like looked at the 90% of things that were going to go wrong and already adjusted this. And they would have put in a stipulation saying, by the way, this cannot affect tips. This cannot affect the way you treat breaks and lunch hours set aside. You can't penalize your employees because of this. And that will be they'll be seen as an act of, some form of aggression that they can be, I guess.
Well, I think one of the things
for.
is that, a business owner, this $14 minimum wage for January 2018 everybody's known about this for how long? A year. So I think a lot of businesses have already started to adjust their prices a year ago, and now are slowly building their prices over to that $15. But also, going back to your first question, actually, was, do you think it will affect like the business that I run? Is I'm going to say no, because I feel like if I can give that employee, a couple $1,000s more a year and have that good morale and have them advocating positively for my business, that's money well spent.
Sure, but I think that that's not in practice what actually happens. So what I'll be honest with you is I think it puts you more towards a cowboy market. And what I mean by that is people don't see the idea of an assured job, or they don't see an idea of somebody even wanting to commit to having to pay somebody the 40 hours a week that you have to pay on that wage, which doesn't equal that amount. You also have to add the EI, the CPP, the this, the that, the insurance. It's not $14 an hour. It's $22 an hour, so that they can get $14 an hour. So when you look at that business, so like me, if I want to hire another person at the restaurant, that's a little out of reach for the budget right now.
Right.
So what ends up happening is I have to get creative, and I have to start doing contractual work, or I have to subcontract areas of my business.
Or you have to work more hours.
Or I have to work more hours, or I have to get the family involved, or whatever else. So it definitely doesn't. Sure, the people that are employed that have safe jobs that are on some kind of tenure or some kind of contract, it's definitely going to affect them in a really positive way. But the ones that are the jobs that are barely standing there in the first place, and the employer can barely afford to hire the person, that goes away. So there's got to be a minimum wage, sure, but there's also got to be a place that you could start as like a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old. You don't need $15 an hour when you're a 14-year-old. You need $5 an hour at 4 hours a day. You need $20 a day to do whatever it is that you want to do with your life. So it's maybe increasing it, but at the same time, people are looking for maximum life on minimum wage, and that's unfair.
Exactly.
That's entitled.
And I mean, the thing is that there's a lot of people that ended up getting stuck in that kind of job because either, they had a kid, or, life happens, right? And, there's some people that are just stuck there, for whatever reason. They can't afford to go back to school to get the education to get a better job or something like that. And what we're seeing happening as the minimum wage goes up, those middle jobs that were like, 5-10 years ago, that were the $14-15 an hour, haven't really changed much. They've just been inhaled by the minimum wage. So now you need more qualifications just to get any job at all. But there's way less
of those jobs, Chris. When you look at it, the attrition in, I'm a studier of just all forms of war. It's like it feels like economic slavery and economic war. It's like, this is the new form of slavery is, instead of investing in entrepreneurship, which is what I'm talking about, the cowboy market. if you want to look what a corporatocracy is, this is what I would do if I was prime minister of the world. I would say, okay, so clearly corporations are another entity, correct? So we have 7 billion people. Well, how many billion corporations do we have? I bet you we don't even have do we have a billion corporations? Do we have a million corporations? Is it 1 million corporations that speak for 7 billion people? Well, that's kind of weird. Well, what if each person was also a corporation? What if we started looking at ourselves, and so we have Chris Coulter Incorporated, and we have Paul Synnott Incorporated, and there's Justice Incorporated, and all these incorporations. So you get to be you as well as the business you. Well, the crazy part about that doesn't really suffice is those people get to put blame on this entity over here called the corporation. So let's say I'm in a corporation, I'm the CEO of a corporation, and I want to screw over all my employees and do this, and this. I could now resign as a CEO and get no penalty for that. Whereas if I was a small business owner, I'm already set up to fail because I have the licenses are more expensive for me because it's a higher percentage of my income to get that license. I also have to pay a patio fee and a business and a this and this and this. You're already getting beat down. Oh, now you just increased my minimum wage, so now I have to lose an employee, or that just cost me my delivery driver. That just cost me, the extra 4 hours that I had to open later or to open earlier.
Well,
the
look
blowback is intense.
Look at other things. I mean, I know a good friend of ours, Mark Boscario, is a local entrepreneur, a restaurant owner. Mark is well known. He treats his employee well. He already pays above average. But he's also a smart guy. You look at his new downtown pizza, Mark was planning and preparing for the minimum wage increase.
He eliminated a lot of that cost of employees by changing the system.
The model that he has set up there, I mean, he has 2 people working in the kitchen and 1 bartender server. Where if he had gone with a traditional model that he does in his other restaurants, there'd be 4 people in the kitchen, a bartender, and 2 servers. So what happens? There are now 4 less jobs that are available because, I mean, a restaurant, you're working on a 3 to 5% profit margin. There's not a lot of room in there. So this is somebody who already pays above market rate, saying, I still have to find a better way to do it. So, like I said, for the people who already have a job, it's good. For the people seeking a job, for the young people, for the teenagers, for the people in university seeking a job, that market just tightened a lot.
You just diminished the entrance level. The entry level positions just got harder to get.
And we already have a problem.
It's harder to get a McDonald's job. It's harder to get a Tim Hortons job. You just can't get those jobs.
We already have a problem with youth unemployment. So this is exacerbating it.
So you're asking, so now you're yelling at the millennials and these new youth saying, you need to get a job, you need to get a job. But hold on, wait a second. I'm your mother and I need your $15 an hour job. Right.
Well, I think one of the things is too, the original reason why minimum wage came in is to make sure that everybody was paid fairly. So you couldn't go to a job like Walmart or something like that.
What is fairly
and go get paid $2 an hour because you can't get a job somewhere else, where they're taking advantage of the fact that you're unable to get a job somewhere else. So that's why it originally came in. Now that being said,
hold on. What does fairly mean? When you say people get paid fairly, what does fairly mean?
It's a good question.
It's a very good question. You say so people can get paid fairly. Okay, tell me what fairly means.
That's a good question. I think if you are working full time in any job, then you shouldn't necessarily be living in poverty. So
maybe, but is it fair for me? Is it fair for you as an employee to put on your employer your entire life? So at the same time that you say that, is it fair that I have to be your dad or am I your employer? Because I don't need to take care of you. I need to pay you the wage that I pay you for the work that you do, and that is the end of it. This idea, this 1960s Ford Motor Company is going to take care of you for the next 60 years, and your standard of living is going to be Model Ts and new dresses for your wife, and you're going to have a pie on the table, is crazy and doesn't exist anymore. And we're talking backwards. What needs to be happening here is, okay, guys, listen, that's not the reality anymore, okay? And it's not the reality that it's a nanny state employment area where every employer, myself who employs people, I don't need to take care of your whole life. I only need to take care of exactly what is fair. And so what is that work worth even? So is it worth multi-million dollars to dunk a ball in a hoop? Well, other people say it is. Depends on how you endorse yourself. It depends on how you promote your personality. It depends on how you decide to leverage. What I'm suggesting, and even with my programs like the Just Warriors program, I'm trying to go into schools, and I do do that, into the high schools and say, listen, I'm not your high school teacher. I'm not your college professor. I'm not your university teacher. I'm going to tell you one thing that none of these people will tell you, that there's another route. That people should be teaching you the route of self-promotion, self-progression, self-growth, expressing your own idea, and then how to turn that idea into a business model so that you can support yourself by your own ideas and your own work instead of you looking constantly for a daddy. We haven't grown up as a society. We keep looking for always someone to blame and somebody to take care of us, which is unfair for the people that you're looking at. You're yelling at your daddy, you're yelling at your mommy for not giving you the world when it's your world to go create, and that's the backwards part that I keep seeing.
Part of the problem I have in terms of the fairness, so we're looking at the $15 minimum wage, which we're going to get to as of January 1st next year, is kind of loosely based on the $15 an hour fair wage. Now, if you look, every calculation, whether it be Canada, Ontario, North America, the way they calculate a living wage is based off a family of four. And this is what a family of four, if both the husband and wife or the partners are working, this is what they would require. I have a problem with setting the minimum wage as a living wage when it's calculated based on a family of four. So if I'm a single person, is that a living wage for a single person? It's actually more because I'm only a single person.
Yes.
I do think that the minimum wage should be based off of...
It depends because sometimes...
Depends on where you live.
Maybe because if you're both in the one house, is it half the rent each? What does it amount to? So that's the problem, is like these complicated little scenarios that they're playing out really depend on the nuclear family model that doesn't exist.
Right.
There is no nuclear family anymore. Like, let's be real.
Well,
Mom and dad don't grow up in a nice little thing. We all watch Family Matters and we all hug each other and go to bed. No, that maybe in the 90s. In the 90s, it really felt like that. When I was growing up as a kid, it really did feel like, mom and dad could work and you could go to school and you could come home and like life wasn't quite so stressful. But now it feels entirely different. It feels busier. It feels more interfered. It feels more disconnected and disassociated from all those things. So you keep associating all of our decisions on realities and metrics that currently doesn't, to make our metrics joke, it metrics that don't exist. You're looking with one eye open, coming from me, that's hilarious because I'm always looking with one eye open. But you know what I'm saying? They're really not looking at the entire equation here.
I do think that the minimum wage should be based off of the poverty line. I don't think that, and I'm saying the individual poverty line.
Right.
So if you are working full time, you should not be. So when you go do your taxes, if you get money back because you live under the poverty line, meanwhile you're working 40 hours a week, that to me is unacceptable. I think you should be at that poverty line. If you want to go above and beyond, make more money, work extra time, overtime, stuff like that, that's up to you.
Sure.
But I
think
that's the way I look at it.
The poverty line or the low income cutoff in Canada now is like 19,500 or 19,400, something like that. So for an individual, on an individual basis.
For an individual, yeah.
So now you're looking at paying a $15 minimum wage. You're mandating somebody to pay $24,000 a year when the low income cutoff is 19,500. So why should I be mandated to pay that much more? I mean, you know what? When I started out, when I first had no skills and whatever else, I got a minimum wage job. And you know what? I had a sucky roommate, too, that I had to live with until I got tired of living with the roommate and figured, well, I better get off my ass, get some education, get some more job experience, and do something else. I mean, that's also the other thing. And the minimum wage isn't meant to guarantee you your own apartment on your own with X, Y, Z. Well, it's meant to give you a standard of living.
Why not just get rid of the minimum wage argument and go right towards? I'm more towards the universal income argument.
Yeah. I'm not universal. I'm a guaranteed annual income, not a universal.
No, because what's that? The monthly. No,
they're different flavors.
Okay, the one project, and forgive me because I need to be more well versed on this. But there's one of the countries, Pioneer, where they do have like a universal income per month. Right, and so everybody gets a certain standard income.
But they're doing that in Canada now as well.
Yeah,
they're all the same in some senses. But I mean, the one I favored is a guaranteed annual income. So the universal income is kind of counterproductive because everybody gets it, everybody, regardless of income, and then they tax it back or take it back. At the end of the day, we know not everybody needs it. The guaranteed annual income means that
you have to get 19,500.
Anybody who needs it gets it. So anybody 18 plus gets at least $1,200 a month. And you know what? it makes more sense because, if I'm giving you at least $1,200, $1,300 a month as an 18-year-old plus, you don't need OSAP anymore. You can afford to go to college, to go to university. There's a lot of other programs, not just welfare. There are a lot of other programs that we're guarantee you a minimum level, and then it doesn't get completely clawed back until you reach 28, 30,000. So even at the 24, 25,000
once
level,
you
you're
reach,
still getting a subsidy to help bring you into the next category.
People are missing the money it takes to produce that money. So let's say the welfare program, right? We pay a bunch of workers to administrate this. So that administration, it's like how we can't get out of debt as a country because we owe more than the money we have.
Right.
So all the money in Canada, we owe more money than we currently have in Canada. So that's the exact same. You get yourself in a catch-22 position.
And then the catch-22 of welfare is, you're on welfare. It's barely subsistence level of income, but then you also have benefits. You have a free transit pass, everything else. So where's the incentive to get off welfare? Is as soon as I get a basic job, I lose all these other benefits.
And you can't get the benefit. Yeah, you can't get the benefits. You won't. Get
and you can't afford it. You can't afford it on a basic job.
Yeah,
so,
there's some people that actually live on welfare and basically choose to live on welfare because they realize that going and getting a minimum wage job pays less and they have less benefits.
And in the end, and that's where a guaranteed annual income will help transition that. You still get that guaranteed income, and it allows you to transition until you get the skills.
Minimum wage when you realize the law of attrition. So the attrition of Mark taking from 9 workers to 4 workers or 3 workers. It's like, yeah, sure, these other people got $2 more, and those other people got $0. Period. Right. They just lost $13 an hour instead of gaining 15. So you got to look at both the sides.
The biggest thing is minimum wage is one of the worst, most inefficient tools to deal with poverty.
The guaranteed annual income makes way more sense because then at least the people who do need the money can get the money, and it would give them a time to discover themselves, to be able to go into a bracket that is past entry level, instead of pretending as if it's a truth that entry level positions should give you adult level living.
Right.
Entry level positions are for teenagers and low 20 to 25-year-olds that are going through university and going through college or becoming an entrepreneur. Like, I didn't invest my money in university and college. I invested my money in losing 3 or 4 businesses and going through the route of the entrepreneur, which is the road less traveled, but you pay a tax just the same. So instead of paying $20,000 a year in your tuition, you're paying $20,000 a year in just life. Or $50,000 a year in life. So it's like, you can go those routes, and people that actually should be shuttled towards that. The problem is that we have a fixed mindset and we have a fixed income. So they want fixed income, fixed mindset. Yeah. So I want to have $2,000 every single month. I don't want inflation to happen. I want my same cereal to show up at Freshco every single week. I want everything to be predictable, and I don't want to change, and I want my little box. Well, unfortunately, guys, that's an esoteric dream. That is
and look at it this way: a guaranteed annual income offers more. A guaranteed annual income with no minimum wage offers flexibility. So, say I'm Paul and I'm getting my $1,200 a month guaranteed annual income, and I really want to work with you, Justice, at your company. I think you have skills and knowledge that I want to learn. So I come to you and say, "Hey, Justice, can I do a 6-month internship with your company? And you know what? I'll work for $5 an hour."
But that's how I became a personal trainer.
I still get my $1,200 a month guaranteed income. I'm getting $5 an hour from you for 6 months, and I'm acquiring skills and knowledge that I can then go and market somewhere else.
That sounds better than my position, where I had just had cancer surgery, had to volunteer at a gym. It's now Joey Flores' gym, but it was Precision back in the day. And I had to volunteer at the gym for $0 to vacuum under treadmills and to tighten weights and to learn the trade by being in the gym, not making $1, being in poverty for sure at that time. And just so happy to deal with the apprenticeship. I would eat peanut butter sandwiches and be happy to be in the gym. And so that thing that makes people strong and that polishes the diamonds from the rough, they're trying to get rid of it in a lot of ways. Like, you need that sandpaper of life to teach you.
I do agree with the guaranteed income, because the other thing is too, look at like sports stars, right? Okay, they don't start off making $1 million a year throwing a ball around, right? They make $0 for a long time. And
It's a massive investment.
so what's happened is exactly it's a massive investment, which is either put on by their parents or maybe by them. Maybe they have to start a little bit later because they worked and saved up and stuff.
I didn't
like
have
that.
cars. I had a body that worked, right? So like some people invest in a Ferrari, some people have to invest in their own human body.
2 feet in a heartbeat.
Or
2 feet in a heartbeat. So it depends on how you want to look at it and what you want your life to be, right? Part of it is, okay, we have the highest obesity rates that we've ever had. We have the lowest rate of people actually becoming individuals. We have less artists and art than we've ever had. We have more people expressing themselves, but not artistically, more like in refined ways. People are finding ways to paint themselves into boxes and to become comfortable instead of getting out of the box. Imagine, I always say this, imagine Bruce Lee had YouTube. What if John Lennon had a SoundCloud? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? And I hear the garbage that I hear on the radio that is like, who wants to listen to music now? Don't you just go backtrack to the 90s or do something that's better or something? I'll go listen to 50s music because it at least is not so depressing as it is now.
Part of it, too, with all of this together, I mean, even just the three of us sitting down here, I mean, we've all listened to the minimum wage debate that's happened over the last couple of weeks and lots of very strong opinions on both sides. And there's a lot of yelling and screaming going on, but not a lot of discussion. And I mean, there are a lot of very deep things going on all around this. And we just talked a little bit about a guaranteed annual income, some of the flexibilities and everything else. So,
which I think is
a lot
great
of what needs to
solution,
happen is
actually.
the discussion, the education, instead of yelling and screaming at each other as, hey, oh, you greedy business owner, and oh, you lazy worker, and all the finger pointing and yelling and screaming. We need shows like this. We need more discussion. We need more education. And getting the word out and having an adult conversation.
Well, I like your idea the tagline. I guess we're going to give it to our friend there. He doesn't like to be mentioned too many times on a podcast, but when we speak, you're heard. That's
right.
the cool model that you guys came up with for We Speak, which is why I'm on board. Is like, to me, the idea of the Words of Justice podcast is if I can speak in a way where maybe you understand the issue better because I want to challenge it. So I'm going to invite some people on. We're going to challenge this idea of minimum wage. Just challenge it. And my part is I don't want to argue it and come from a perspective, but more look at the actual solution. So, I'm more of a philosopher than a politician. And I think that when you look at fundamentals of things, you can get to lowest common denominator solutions. Let's look at, like when I think about cities, I go back to Aristotle and think why we made cities in the first place before I start rattling off 14 ideas. So I think that people are not coming from a fundamental place of like, Paul's good at this. He'll break down on his post like the history of this decision. Hey, the city did this decision. Oh, by the way, it doesn't make sense, or it does make sense because this, and this. So people are not even outlaying their points. They're just accusing blame. They're liking to label each other as whatever label that they want to hate on. So that's the discourse. The discourse is destructive instead of constructive.
Well, it's kind of the social media disease. We're used to going on Twitter and Facebook and lobbing bombs at each other. And again, we're losing the discourse, the conversation.
Well, I think one of the biggest issues, honestly, with getting into the social media aspect of it is that people silo themselves in this thing.
Absolutely.
So, for example, is looking at the last U.S. Election, every single Hillary supporter out there had no doubt that Hillary was going to win, and every single Trump supporter out there had no doubt that Trump was going to win. Of course, only one was going to win, but that's because all of the Hillary fans had friends on their Facebook that were also posting, oh yeah, Hillary's great, blah, blah, and all the Trump people were posting, Trump's going to win, et cetera, et cetera. So, and they were completely separate and nobody saw each other's side. So everybody went in thinking, "Oh, I'm definitely."
It's because there was no each other. That's my point. Is the narcissistic culture that we've developed. So social media has allowed us to, at a faster rate than has ever progressed, develop our ego to a catastrophic point. So that all of our egos are so counterproductive because we are more. Okay, how many times do you see somebody take a picture of themselves in the gym and they didn't work out? You know how many times I see somebody do a quick little
I don't know
gym
because
snap?
I don't go to the
Okay,
gym.
So fair, but at least I didn't see a picture of you in a gym pretending like you did.
Fair enough.
So my point is,
You won't ever have to worry about seeing me in a gym.
I definitely didn't see Paul. But my point is, like, that's what people do. They take the photo op. Okay, so whether it's the gym or the vacation or their kid or whatever. Okay, lots of moms take a picture of their kid. Oh, I love my time with my kid. The second that picture's done, they're back on their phone, not paying attention to their kid, and doing the other 14 narcissistic things that they need to do, Snapchatting their own picture of themselves instead of taking care of their kid or their son or their business or whatever it is. We are in a narcissistic explosion where the ego has not caught up with our fundamental communication hasn't caught up with our own overinflation of ego, so that people believe that their opinion is so much more valuable than yours because they come from this higher ground than you, and they come from a more moral position than you, as if there is one.
Well, I'm going to say,
as he said, the silos. I mean, everybody gets locked into their silo.
The perfect, I guess, analogy or so with what you were just talking about is the whole ribbon cutting thing, right? So, you know, the person who sponsored the event, or maybe even just owns the company or something like that, they're opening a new building or anything, comes up, they cut the ribbon and take the photo up and then leave, right? They didn't do actually anything to even help the event or anything like that. So I think
oh man, it's dusty in this room.
Did you sneeze in there over there?
I think I sneezed. You know what I'm talking about. Exactly what I'm talking about.
That's the ribbon cutting thing,
mentality.
right? So, yeah.
Well, even like, you know, not to get too political and to dive into it a bit more, but like, okay, so the archetypes. So I'm obsessed with archetypes and psychologies, right? So, you know, the mayor that I always obsess with, maybe Chris is maybe too young to get this, but Paul will understand it. McClintock. Remember that movie? Remember John Wayne as the mayor? John Wayne was he was the fight referee. He was the volunteer fireman. He was the sheriff. He was literally the guy. No matter what, he changed all of his hats. The mayor was.
But he was the land baron.
He was
which
the land
gave him
baron.
all that.
Of course, that's fair, right? So there's another little twist in there. Of course, he did own the town, and so there's a part of it. But there was part of it where the mayor literally would walk among the people and would be one of the people actually working in the streets and develop those conversations. Now what we have is people that put on suits and they give themselves titles, or I guess we vote them into these titles, and then they act separate from a human. That's what always confuses me. That's my whole part of my podcast that I would like to get out there, is to re-engage in the humanity of humans. Because here's what I'll tell you. Technology has advanced more in 100 years than it has in 100,000. And our technology of thought and our technology of communication has nowhere near kept up. Our technology of ideology has nowhere kept up with the iPhone. It hasn't kept up with the iPad and the camera and the microphone that we're talking into right now and the earphone that's in my ear. We don't understand what this means when it turns into robots and artificial intelligence and realities that you're plugging into with virtual headsets where you're simulated with drugs to feel certain sensations. We are going that way in the next 20 years. And my biggest problem personally, and that I'm trying to rage against, is that we are going to lose our humanity within that. We're already losing our humanity within the very simple tool of social media on a phone. That's nothing compared to the implant chip and the virtual realities that we're going to be experiencing, where it's like the Sim. You ever see the movie like Gamer?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect example where there's like a Sim City-like existence, but it's real people, and we're all chipped in, and we're getting paid to do this because these rich people are watching the monkeys on the screen, and it's all another form of social media slavery. But you're going to submit to it. That's the scarier part. We're gonna submit to our own slavery. So the Words of Justice podcast, hopefully we're going to not be slaves. We're going to have the freedom of thought, freedom of speech. And as I bring more free people on, we can have these conversations freely and hopefully free the minds around us. So tune into Words of Justice podcast.
Thanks for having me on. I mean, even though I own the station, it's nice to join a show and take part in a launch of something new. And I look forward to what you're going to do with the show going forward in the future.
Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Justice.
And we'll tune in next week, guys. We're going to start the official Words of Justice podcast as often as we can do.